Ma'am, I said ID now. Stop playing games.
I've committed no violation. You have no lawful basis for this stop.
You're in an area known for illegal crossings, and you expect me to just assume you belong here?
I am a federal judge.
You are making a catastrophic mistake.
Judge Vanessa Sterling had been a federal judge for 12 years. She'd presided over hundreds of cases, interpreted constitutional law, and sworn an oath to uphold justice. But none of that mattered to the two ICE agents standing outside her car at a Shell gas station on a Tuesday morning. They saw a black woman in professional attire and made an assumption that would cost them everything. She was filling up her Mercedes before heading to the courthouse. The gas pump clicked. She replaced the nozzle. That's when the unmarked SUV pulled up behind her, blocking her exit. Two men stepped out wearing tactical vests with ICE printed across the chest. Agent Kyle Brennan and Agent Travis Mendoza had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement for 8 and 6 years respectively. They were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. Judge Sterling asked again what violation justified the stop. Brennan repeated his demand for identification. His hand rested on his belt near his weapon. Mendoza circled around to the passenger side of her vehicle, peering through the windows. Other customers at the gas station started watching. Someone pulled out their phone. "I'm a federal judge. This stop is unconstitutional. You have no authority to detain me without reasonable suspicion of a crime." Brennan smirked. "Sure you are. And I'm the president. License and registration. Last time I'm asking nicely." What happened next would be dissected frame by frame in federal court. Judge Sterling, maintaining her composure despite the rage building inside her, slowly reached into her purse. She pulled out her judicial identification, the kind issued only to sitting federal judges, complete with her photo and the seal of the federal judiciary. She held it up clearly. Brennan glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds. He handed it back. "That doesn't mean anything. We still need to verify your immigration status." Judge Sterling's jaw tightened. "You just looked at federal judicial credentials and dismissed them. This is unlawful detention. I'm ordering you to step aside and let me leave." "You're not ordering us to do anything." Mendoza's voice came from behind her. "We have authority under federal immigration law to conduct stops and verify status. Not without individualized, reasonable suspicion you don't. And you certainly don't have authority over a sitting federal judge. This encounter is over." She moved toward her driver's door. Brennan stepped forward, blocking her path. His hand moved to his handcuffs. That's when Judge Sterling made the decision that would ultimately save her, but destroy them. She pulled out her cell phone and began recording. "I am Federal Judge Vanessa Sterling of the Northern District. I am being illegally detained by 2 ICE agents at the Shell station on Riverside Boulevard. I have presented my credentials. I have committed no violation. I am documenting this unconstitutional stop." "Turn off that phone." Brennan's voice rose. "You're interfering with a federal investigation." "I am the investigation, and this recording is evidence of your constitutional violations." Mendoza moved closer. His face appeared on camera. "Ma'am, if you don't comply right now, we will arrest you for obstruction." The absurdity of the threat hung in the air. 2 immigration agents threatening to arrest a federal judge for refusing an unlawful detention. But Brennan and Mendoza weren't thinking about consequences. They were thinking about control, about authority being challenged, about a black woman who wouldn't submit. Brennan grabbed Judge Sterling's wrist. The phone nearly dropped, but she held on. Mendoza moved in from the other side. Within seconds, they had forced her against her own vehicle. The phone was still recording, now capturing shaky footage of the gas station pavement and the agent's boots. "You are making a catastrophic mistake." Judge Sterling's voice remained steady even as metal handcuffs closed around her wrists. "I am a federal judge. You are committing multiple federal crimes right now. Save it for processing." Brennan guided her toward their SUV. Other gas station customers stood frozen, watching a woman in a tailored suit being arrested at a fuel pump. 3 people were recording now. One man shouted, asking if she needed help. Mendoza told him to back away or face obstruction charges himself. The drive to the ICE field office took 19 minutes. Judge Sterling sat in the back seat, hands cuffed behind her, saying nothing. She had said everything that mattered already. Now she would let the system respond. And respond it would, with a force that Brennan and Mendoza couldn't begin to imagine. At the field office, they walked her inside like she was a dangerous criminal. Other agents glanced over with mild curiosity. Just another person being processed. Mendoza logged her into the system. Name, physical description, location of apprehension. He typed quickly, barely looking at the screen. Then came the part where they collect personal belongings. Judge Sterling's purse was emptied onto a metal table. Wallet, keys, lipstick, tissues, phone, and then the items that should have stopped everything immediately. Her judicial credentials, the ones Brennan had dismissed at the gas station. Her federal courthouse access badge with embedded security chip. Her Bar Association membership showing she'd been a licensed attorney for 23 years before her appointment to the bench. A business card identifying her as Judge Vanessa Sterling, U.S. District Court. The processing agent, a woman named Officer Rebecca Patel, picked up the credentials. She studied them carefully. She looked at Judge Sterling, then at Brennan and Mendoza, who were standing nearby filling out paperwork. Did you see these? Brennan barely looked up. Yeah, they're fake. She claimed to be a federal judge, obviously lying. Patel had processed thousands of people. She knew what fake credentials looked like. These weren't fake. The holographic seals, the embedded security features, the weight of the cards, everything was authentic. She opened her computer and pulled up the Federal Judiciary Directory. What's your full name and district? Judge Vanessa Sterling, Northern District. Patel typed. The search results loaded. There was the photo matching the woman sitting in front of her. The biography listing her education, her appointment by the president 8 years ago, her confirmation by the Senate, recent cases she'd presided over. Everything matched. Patel's face went pale. She stood up slowly and walked directly to her supervisor's office. She didn't knock, just opened the door. Her supervisor, District Director Nathan Cross, looked up annoyed at the interruption. We have a significant problem. 5 minutes later, Cross was standing in the processing area, staring at Judge Sterling. He'd pulled up the same federal directory on his own computer. He'd called the courthouse and confirmed she was scheduled to be in court that afternoon. He'd looked at Brennan and Mendoza's arrest report, which listed 0 specific violations, 0 reasonable suspicion, just vague references to an immigration verification stop. Cross had been with ICE for 15 years. He'd navigated political controversies, policy changes, and public scrutiny. But he'd never dealt with anything like this. His agents had just arrested a sitting federal judge without a warrant, without cause, without any legal justification whatsoever. Release her immediately. His voice was quiet but sharp. Remove the handcuffs, return all her belongings, and someone get me the agency's legal counsel on the phone right now. Judge Sterling stood as the handcuffs came off. She rubbed her wrists where the metal had pressed into her skin. She collected her belongings methodically, checking that everything was present. Her phone, still containing the recording. Her credentials, now validated. Her dignity, somehow intact despite everything. Cross approached carefully. Your Honor, I apologize for this incident. There's been a serious misunderstanding. Director Cross, there was no misunderstanding. Your agents conducted an unlawful stop, ignored federal credentials, and arrested a sitting federal judge. Those are facts, not misunderstandings. We'll be conducting a full internal investigation. You'll be facing a federal civil rights lawsuit and likely criminal charges for violating my constitutional rights under color of law. She walked toward the exit. Brennan and Mendoza stood against the wall, finally understanding that something had gone terribly wrong. Judge Sterling paused and looked directly at them. You'll be hearing from me again. In court. The door closed behind Judge Sterling with a soft click that somehow felt louder than any slam could have been. She stood outside the ICE facility in the harsh afternoon sunlight, free, but fundamentally changed by what had just happened. Her phone buzzed immediately. 17 missed calls, 42 text messages. Her clerk, her staff, the courthouse security, all wondering where she was. She had missed an entire afternoon of scheduled hearings, cases that mattered, people whose lives depended on her rulings, left waiting while she sat handcuffed in a processing room for the crime of existing in her own skin. She didn't call anyone back yet. Instead, she opened the voice recording app on her phone. The file was still there, 23 minutes and 14 seconds of audio capturing every word spoken during that traffic stop. Every illegal question, every ignored credential, every moment of her constitutional rights being violated by federal agents who should have known better. Judge Sterling walked to her car, still parked exactly where Brennan had forced her to leave it. A parking ticket fluttered under the windshield wiper. Even that felt like a final insult. She pulled it out and actually laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised her. Arrested without cause and ticketed for the privilege. The drive back to the courthouse took 30 minutes through heavy traffic. She used the time to think, to plan, to shift from victim back to judge. Because that's what she was, regardless of what agents Brennan and Mendoza saw when they looked at her. A federal judge with the full power of the judiciary behind her. When she arrived, the courthouse was in controlled chaos. Her clerk practically ran to meet her at the entrance. "Judge Sterling, we've been trying to reach you for hours. Are you all right? What happened?" "Reschedule everything from this afternoon, clear my calendar for tomorrow morning, and get me the contact information for the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility and the Inspector General for Homeland Security." Her chambers felt different when she entered. The same mahogany desk, the same leather chair, the same law books lining the walls. But she wasn't the same person who had left that morning. Something had shifted. The theoretical cases she presided over, the abstract questions of constitutional law and civil rights, they weren't abstract anymore. They were personal. They were real. They were burned into her wrists where the handcuffs had been. She spent the next 4 hours making calls. The first was to her husband, a college professor who listened in stunned silence as she explained what happened. The second was to her attorney, because even judges need lawyers when their rights are violated. The third was to the chief judge of her district, because this wasn't just a personal matter. This was an assault on the judiciary itself. By 7 that evening, the machinery of justice had begun its grinding work. The Department of Justice opened a preliminary inquiry. The Inspector General's office assigned investigators. The chief judge issued a statement expressing grave concern and demanding a full accounting. And Judge Sterling's attorney filed a notice of intent to sue, the first step toward a federal civil rights lawsuit that would cost the government far more than money. But that was just the official response. The unofficial response was spreading through the legal community like wildfire. Judges talked to other judges. Attorneys shared the story with colleagues. Law clerks posted about it on private forums. By the next morning, every legal professional in the district knew that 2 ICE agents had arrested a sitting federal judge, and the implications were staggering. Meanwhile, back at the ICE facility, Director Cross was having the worst night of his career. He sat in his office reviewing the arrest report for the 100th time, searching for anything that might justify what his agents had done. There was nothing. No warrant, no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion. Just 2 agents who saw a black woman and decided that was sufficient reason to demand papers and make an arrest when she objected. The agency's legal counsel had been brutally clear. This case was indefensible. The agents had violated clearly established constitutional rights. Qualified immunity wouldn't protect them. The agency would likely lose any lawsuit. The only question was how much it would cost. Cross called Brennan and Mendoza into his office at 6 the next morning. Both agents arrived looking exhausted. Word had spread through the facility about exactly who they had arrested, and neither had slept well. "You're both suspended without pay, effective immediately. You'll surrender your badges and firearms. You're prohibited from discussing this case with anyone except your attorneys and our investigators. Do you understand?" Brennan's jaw tightened. This is political correctness gone crazy. We were doing our jobs. Your job doesn't include arresting federal judges without cause. Your job doesn't include ignoring valid credentials. Your job doesn't include violating constitutional rights. She showed us a fake ID. Anyone can print a card. Cross slid a printed page across the desk. It was Judge Sterling's official biography from the federal judiciary website, complete with her photo, her credentials, her 8 years on the bench. Anyone can print a card, but not anyone can have their photo and biography on the official federal court website. Not anyone can be listed in the National Judiciary Database. You didn't check because you didn't want to believe her. Mendoza spoke for the first time. What happens now? Now you get attorneys. Good ones. Because the Department of Justice is investigating you for civil rights violations under color of law. That's a federal felony. And Judge Sterling will be filing a civil lawsuit. You're both looking at criminal charges and personal financial liability. The color drained from Mendoza's face. We could go to prison? Cross nodded. People have gone to prison for less egregious violations than arresting a federal judge without cause. The investigation moved quickly because the evidence was overwhelming. The dashboard camera from the ICE vehicle showed the entire stop. Judge Sterling's phone recording captured every conversation. The processing paperwork documented the arrest. There were no gaps, no ambiguities, no questions about what happened. Within 2 weeks, the Department of Justice made its decision. Criminal charges would be filed against both agents. Deprivation of rights under color of law, false arrest, and abuse of authority. Each charge carried potential prison time. The civil lawsuit followed shortly after. Judge Sterling's attorney filed a comprehensive complaint in federal court. It named Brennan and Mendoza individually, named ICE as an agency, and named the Department of Homeland Security. The damages sought were substantial, but the complaint made clear this wasn't primarily about money. It was about accountability. The case was randomly assigned to another federal judge in the same district. Judge Thomas Crawford had served on the bench for 12 years and knew Judge Sterling professionally. He read the complaint with increasing disbelief, then reviewed the evidence attached as exhibits. The recordings, the video, the documented timeline. Everything confirmed exactly what the complaint alleged. This will not be a long trial, he thought. This will be a settlement negotiation. He was right. The government's attorneys reviewed the same evidence and reached the same conclusion. They had no defense. Their own agents' actions were documented beyond any possibility of dispute. Going to trial would mean playing that dashboard camera footage for a jury, letting them hear 2 federal agents dismiss a judge's credentials as fake, watching them arrest her without legal justification. Settlement discussions began within a month. The government offered $500,000. Judge Sterling's attorney countered with $2.5 million. Not because Judge Sterling needed the money, but because the number had to be large enough to hurt, to force systemic change, to make sure this never happened to anyone else. The negotiations continued for weeks. Meanwhile, the criminal case moved forward on a parallel track. Brennan and Mendoza both retained private attorneys using their life savings. Both were advised to consider plea agreements because taking these charges to trial was effectively suicide. Brennan refused. He maintained he'd done nothing wrong, that he was being persecuted for enforcing immigration law. His attorney told him he was making a catastrophic mistake. Brennan fired his attorney and hired another one, who told him the same thing. Mendoza was more realistic. She understood that the evidence was damning, that her career was over, that her only hope of avoiding significant prison time was cooperation. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal. Mendoza would plead guilty to 1 count of deprivation of rights under color of law. She would testify against Brennan if his case went to trial. In exchange, prosecutors would recommend probation instead of prison. She took the deal. Standing in federal court, ironically just 2 floors below where Judge Sterling's chambers were located, Mendoza pleaded guilty. She admitted that she had participated in an unlawful stop and arrest. She acknowledged violating Judge Sterling's constitutional rights. She accepted responsibility for her actions. Judge Crawford, presiding over the plea hearing, asked if she understood what she was admitting. Mendoza said yes. He asked if anyone had forced or coerced her plea. She said no. He accepted the guilty plea and scheduled sentencing for 3 months later. Brennan watched all of this happen and still refused to accept reality. His new attorney begged him to reconsider. The evidence was overwhelming. His former partner had turned against him. He was going to lose at trial and face years in federal prison. "Please," his attorney said, "take a deal while there's still time." Brennan refused. He would take his chances with a jury. He believed 12 ordinary citizens would understand he was just doing his job, just following procedures, just trying to enforce the law. His attorney knew better, but couldn't force him to see reason. The civil settlement was finally reached 4 months after the arrest. The government agreed to pay Judge Sterling $1.8 million. More importantly, they agreed to policy changes. All federal agencies would implement mandatory training on implicit bias and proper identification verification. Dashboard cameras would be reviewed quarterly for constitutional violations. Agents who made unlawful stops would face immediate suspension pending investigation. The settlement terms were made public, and the dollar amount made headlines. But Judge Sterling cared more about the policy changes. She wanted to prevent this from happening again, to the next person, to someone who didn't have her resources or legal knowledge. The criminal trial against Brennan began 6 months after the arrest. The courtroom was packed. Local media filled the gallery. Civil rights organizations sent observers. Federal employees came to watch one of their own face justice. The prosecution's case was devastating from the opening statement. They walked the jury through every moment of that traffic stop. They explained how Judge Sterling had done nothing wrong, had presented valid credentials, had asked reasonable questions. They showed how Brennan ignored all evidence contradicting his assumptions, how he invented justifications after the fact, how he arrested a federal judge for the crime of questioning his authority. The dashboard camera footage played on large monitors. Every juror watched as Brennan dismissed Judge Sterling's credentials without even examining them properly. They heard him tell her to stop talking, to stop asking questions, to comply or face arrest. They saw him handcuff a woman who had committed no violation whatsoever. The prosecution called Mendoza as a witness. She testified for 3 hours. She explained that she had tried to tell Brennan they should verify the credentials. She admitted she should have tried harder, should have insisted, should have refused to participate. She acknowledged her own guilt, but made clear that Brennan had been the driving force behind everything that happened. Cross-examination was brutal. Brennan's attorney tried to paint Mendoza as a liar trying to save herself. He suggested she was the one who wanted to make the arrest and was now blaming Brennan. But the dashboard footage contradicted everything he claimed. The video showed exactly who made each decision, who gave each command, who chose escalation over verification. Expert witnesses testified about proper law enforcement procedures. A former ICE supervisor explained that Brennan had violated every protocol designed to prevent exactly this kind of mistake. A constitutional law professor walked the jury through the Fourth Amendment, explaining how Brennan's actions constituted a clear violation of Judge Sterling's rights. Judge Sterling herself took the stand. She described the humiliation of being arrested in her own vehicle. She explained how she had remained calm despite knowing she was being unlawfully detained. She recounted the fear she felt, not physical fear, but fear that anything she did or said would be used to justify violence against her. The defense tried to suggest Judge Sterling had been uncooperative, that she had escalated the situation by asking questions. Her attorney objected immediately. Asking questions is not a crime. Asserting your rights is not obstruction. The judge sustained the objection and instructed the jury to disregard the implication. Brennan took the stand in his own defense. His attorney had advised against it, but Brennan insisted. He needed to explain himself, to make the jury understand. His testimony was a disaster. He claimed he had reasonable suspicion based on Judge Sterling's presence in a high-traffic area for undocumented individuals. The prosecution immediately challenged this. What high-traffic area? A residential street in a middle-class neighborhood? Brennan couldn't provide specifics. He said Judge Sterling seemed nervous. The dashboard footage showed her perfectly calm. He claimed her credentials looked suspicious. He couldn't articulate what specifically seemed suspicious about valid federal documents. The prosecution destroyed him on cross-examination. They played the video again, pausing at key moments. When exactly did you verify these credentials before dismissing them? Brennan admitted he hadn't run them through any system. Did you call the courthouse to confirm Judge Sterling's identity? No. Did you consult a supervisor before making the arrest? No. Did Judge Sterling commit any traffic violation that justified the initial stop? A long pause. No. So you stopped her based on what exactly? Another pause. Her appearance in that area at that time. Her appearance, yes. And what about her appearance made you suspicious? Brennan realized the trap too late. There was no answer he could give that wouldn't sound like exactly what it was. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned guilty verdicts on both counts: deprivation of rights under color of law and making false statements in official reports. Brennan sat motionless as the verdicts were read. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but Brennan didn't react. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 months later. Brennan remained free on bond until then, but his life as he knew it was over. The federal conviction meant he could never work in law enforcement again. His pension was forfeit. His reputation was destroyed. Mendoza's sentencing came first. She stood before Judge Crawford, the same judge who had accepted her guilty plea. Her attorney presented letters from family and colleagues describing her years of service, her previously clean record, her genuine remorse. Mendoza herself addressed the court. She apologized to Judge Sterling, who sat in the gallery. She acknowledged that following orders was not an excuse, that she had her own moral responsibility to refuse unlawful commands. She said she would spend the rest of her life trying to make amends. Judge Crawford sentenced her to 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a $10,000 fine. He noted that her cooperation and genuine remorse weighed heavily in his decision, but emphasized that what she did was serious, that she had betrayed her oath and violated someone's fundamental rights. Mendoza accepted the sentence without appeal. Brennan's sentencing 2 weeks later was entirely different. He showed no remorse. His attorney presented a sentencing memorandum arguing that Brennan had acted in good faith, that mistakes happen in law enforcement, that prison time would be excessive. The prosecution's memorandum told a different story. It detailed Brennan's history of complaints, the pattern of stops targeting people of color, the multiple warnings from supervisors that he had ignored. This was not one mistake. This was a pattern of constitutional violations that finally caught up with him. Judge Sterling submitted a victim impact statement. She described the lasting effects of being treated like a criminal in her own community. She explained how she still felt anxiety during any interaction with law enforcement, how the arrest had undermined her sense of safety and belonging. She noted that as a judge, she understood the legal system better than most victims, yet still felt powerless in that moment. What about people without her knowledge, resources, or position? How many others had Brennan violated who never got justice? Judge Crawford read the entire statement aloud in court. Then he addressed Brennan directly. You were given authority and power to serve your community. You abused that power. You targeted someone based on assumptions and bias, then arrested her when she dared to question you. Even now, after a jury convicted you, you show no understanding of what you did wrong. That concerns me deeply. The sentence was harsh. 30 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release following incarceration, a $50,000 fine, restitution to Judge Sterling for attorney fees and costs. Brennan's attorney immediately filed notice of appeal, but everyone in that courtroom knew it was futile. The evidence was overwhelming, the verdict sound, the sentence within guidelines. The appeal would fail. Brennan was taken into custody immediately. No more freedom while waiting, No more chances to flee or influence anyone. Federal marshals placed him in handcuffs and led him out of the courtroom. The same handcuffs he had placed on Judge Sterling now bound his own wrists. The symmetry was not lost on anyone present. Judge Sterling watched him leave. She felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just exhaustion and sadness that it had come to this, that someone entrusted with authority had abused it so thoroughly. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded her. She made a brief statement. Justice has been served, but justice delayed is justice diminished. This should never have happened. The system failed long before that traffic stop. Multiple complaints were ignored, warning signs dismissed, patterns overlooked. Real accountability means preventing these violations, not just punishing them after the damage is done. The reporters dispersed within minutes, but the real fallout was just beginning. Within 24 hours, a civil rights organization filed a class action lawsuit against the entire police department. They had compiled records going back 7 years, showing systematic patterns of racial profiling, unlawful stops, and retaliatory arrests. Judge Sterling's case wasn't unique. It was just the one that finally made headlines because of who she was. The lawsuit identified 43 other victims. A teacher arrested for jaywalking after questioning why an officer stopped him. A nurse detained for suspicious behavior while sitting in her own car outside her apartment. A college student handcuffed for matching the description of a suspect who was 6 inches shorter and 30 pounds heavier. A grandfather tackled during a wellness check his own daughter had requested. Every single victim was Black or Latino. Every single officer involved had complaint histories that were ignored. The patterns were undeniable once someone actually looked. But here's what made it worse. Internal Affairs had the data all along. They knew which officers generated the most complaints. They knew which precincts had the highest rates of use of force against minorities. They knew supervisors were signing off on questionable arrests without proper review. They simply chose not to act because acting would mean admitting there was a problem. And admitting problems meant liability, bad press, budget fights, political headaches. So they buried it. Filed reports in databases no one searched. Marked complaints as unfounded without real investigation. Transferred problem officers to different districts instead of firing them. The system protected itself while the community suffered. The discovery process in the class action revealed emails that should never have been written. Supervisors joking about arrest quotas in certain neighborhoods. Officers sharing memes mocking people they had detained. A lieutenant telling subordinates to find reasons to stop people in high-crime areas, which was code everyone understood. The department's own training materials included outdated techniques that civil rights experts said practically encouraged constitutional violations. None of this was accidental. It was institutional rot that had been festering for decades. Judge Sterling became the face of the lawsuit, though she never wanted that role. She gave depositions, appeared at hearings, testified before city council. Every appearance meant reliving that traffic stop, answering questions about how it felt, explaining the fear and humiliation over and over. She did it anyway, because the 43 other victims deserved someone with her platform fighting alongside them. Most of them didn't have legal backgrounds. Most couldn't afford the kind of attorneys this case required. Most would have been ignored if they had tried fighting alone. The city's defense strategy was predictable. They claimed these were isolated incidents by officers who didn't represent department values. They pointed to diversity training programs and community outreach initiatives as proof they took these issues seriously. They argued that policing is difficult, that split-second decisions sometimes go wrong, that hindsight is 20/20. Their attorneys painted the officers as dedicated public servants who made honest mistakes under pressure. The problem was the evidence. Thousands of pages of data showing the mistakes somehow always happened to the same communities. Video footage from body cameras and dash cams showing officers lying in their reports. Testimony from sergeants admitting they approved arrests without reviewing the facts because they trusted their officers' judgment. That trust was misplaced, and now the city was paying for it. 18 months after the lawsuit was filed, the city settled. $230 million, split among the 43 victims and their attorneys. Comprehensive reforms, including independent oversight, mandatory body cameras that couldn't be turned off, automatic review of any arrest where charges were dropped, and termination for officers who filed false reports. The police union fought every single reform, claiming they would make officers hesitant to act, that crime would skyrocket, that good cops would leave the force. Some did leave. Most stayed. Crime didn't increase. Complaints dropped by 60% within the first year. Judge Sterling received $4.7 million from the settlement. She donated $3 million to organizations supporting criminal justice reform. She used another $1 million to establish a legal defense fund for people who couldn't afford attorneys when challenging unlawful arrests. She kept the rest, not because she needed it, but because accepting it meant the city officially acknowledged what they had done to her. The money was accountability in its most tangible form. Brennan served 22 months before being released to a halfway house. Federal prisoners typically serve 85% of their sentence if they behave, and Brennan kept his head down. He worked in the prison library, took classes, stayed out of trouble. He never admitted guilt, never expressed genuine remorse, but he learned to say the right things during parole hearings. When he was finally released, he moved to a different state where no one knew his name or his history. He couldn't work in law enforcement anymore. His conviction made that impossible. He took a job doing private security at a warehouse, checking badges and watching cameras. The irony of a man who abused authority, now working minimum wage security, wasn't lost on anyone who knew his story. Mendoza had a different trajectory. Her cooperation and genuine remorse opened doors Brennan's defiance had closed. After completing probation, she became an advocate. She spoke at police academies about what she had done wrong and why. She testified before legislative committees considering reforms. She met with community groups who had every reason to hate her and answered their questions honestly, no matter how uncomfortable. Some people forgave her. Many didn't. She accepted both responses as consequences she had earned. Judge Sterling returned to the bench 6 months after the settlement. Some questioned whether she could be impartial in cases involving police testimony. She proved them wrong by ruling based on evidence, not emotion. She convicted defendants when the evidence warranted it and acquitted them when it didn't. She held officers accountable when they lied and credited them when they testified truthfully. Her experience made her better at her job, not worse. She could spot inconsistencies in police reports that other judges missed. She asked questions that revealed whether an officer truly had probable cause or was justifying a hunch. Defense attorneys requested her courtroom. Prosecutors learned they needed solid cases, not just a badge and a story. 3 years after the traffic stop, a reporter asked Judge Sterling if she thought anything good had come from what happened to her. She considered the question carefully before answering. Good isn't the word I would use. Necessary, maybe. My case forced changes that should have happened decades ago. But those changes came at a cost to me and 43 other people who never should have been violated in the first place. We shouldn't need federal judges to be unlawfully arrested before the system takes these problems seriously. We shouldn't need viral videos and lawsuits and public outrage before basic constitutional rights are protected. The fact that we do tells you everything about how broken things were. The police department still exists. Officers still make traffic stops. Arrests still happen. But the culture shifted in ways both measurable and subtle. Officers know their body cameras are recording and will be reviewed. Supervisors know signing off on bad arrests will cost them their jobs. The community knows they can file complaints that will actually be investigated. None of it is perfect. Systems created over decades don't transform overnight. But the trajectory changed, and that matters. Brennan's appeal failed, as predicted. His conviction stands. His prison sentence is public record. Anyone searching his name finds the full story of what he did and what it cost him. That permanent stain is part of his punishment, a reminder that authority without accountability eventually destroys those who abuse it. Some officers learned from his example. Others resented it, viewing him as a scapegoat for systemic problems. Both reactions missed the point. Brennan wasn't a scapegoat. He was someone who violated rights repeatedly until he finally faced consequences. The system that enabled him for so long deserved scrutiny too, and it got that scrutiny through the lawsuit and reforms that followed. Judge Sterling still drives past the intersection where Brennan pulled her over. She doesn't avoid it or take alternate routes. That corner doesn't own her. She reclaimed it by refusing to let what happened there define her or limit her movements. Sometimes she thinks about that moment, the lights in her mirror, the sinking feeling in her stomach. Then she keeps driving, exactly where she needs to go. That gas station on Riverside Boulevard still operates. People fill up their tanks every day, unaware of the history that unfolded on that concrete. But for Judge Sterling, for Brennan, for Mendoza, for the 43 other victims whose names never made headlines, that intersection represents something permanent. It's a reminder that badges don't grant immunity from consequences, that cameras capture truth that reports can't hide, that justice delayed is still justice when it finally arrives. The system failed repeatedly before it worked. Complaints ignored, patterns dismissed, violations rewarded with promotions instead of punishment. It took a federal judge being handcuffed at a fuel pump before anyone with power decided enough was enough. That reality should disturb everyone watching this, because it means countless others suffered without remedy, without witness, without the platform to force change. Real accountability isn't one verdict or one settlement. It's cultural transformation that makes these violations unthinkable instead of routine. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, a lot of you have told me you're waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and just lying there. Can't shut your mind off. And the next day you're dragging through everything. I came across a simple 21-day sleep guide that's helped thousands of people fix exactly that. No pills, no apps, no gadgets. Just a step-by-step plan that actually works. It's only $15. I put the link in the description if you want to check it out. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.